Tonight, I am not speaking to you as a title, a uniform, or a headline. I am speaking to you as a man who has learned, slowly and often painfully, how small his control over life truly is. In a world where leaders are trained to sound confident, to speak fast, and to never show hesitation, I want to begin with a different kind of honesty. Before people saw my office, before they trusted my authority, before my decisions carried the weight of nations and consequences, I was simply a human being searching for direction in a world that does not slow down for anyone. Many of you in America understand this more than you realize. You work hard. You plan carefully. You carry responsibility for families, businesses, classrooms, communities, and futures that depend on your choices. And somewhere beneath all that effort, there is a quiet question most people never say out loud. Am I really in control? Or am I only trying to survive the pressure? Tonight, I am not here to persuade you. I am here to tell you what changed the way I carry responsibility, power, and fear, and why I no longer believe that strength begins with control. For a long time, I believed discipline was enough. I believed that if a person worked harder than everyone else, planned better than everyone else, and stayed mentally sharper than the pressure around them, life could be held together by force of will. That belief shaped me. It taught me to wake up early, to stay composed when others panicked, to carry responsibility without complaint, to make decisions even when the consequences were heavy. From the outside, it looked like strength, and in many ways, it was. But there is a quiet danger in a life built only on control. You begin to believe that every outcome rests on your shoulders. You begin to measure your worth by results. You begin to confuse responsibility with ownership of everything that can go wrong. I told myself that this was leadership. I told myself that tension was normal. I told myself that pressure was simply the price of being useful. But over time, something inside me began to erode. Not my discipline, not my performance, not my reputation. My inner rest. The noise became constant. Decisions followed me into the night. Conversations replayed in my mind long after they ended. Even silence felt heavy. I was still functioning, but I was no longer steady. Many people in America live this way without ever naming it. You keep showing up, you keep producing, you keep solving problems. Yet inside you are running a marathon with no finish line. And there comes a moment, quiet and deeply personal, when effort stops being enough. That moment came for me when responsibility no longer felt meaningful. It only felt endless. I did not collapse. I did not quit. I did not fail publicly. But privately, I realized something that scared me more than any external crisis. I had built a strong life without building a safe place for my soul. The breaking point did not come through scandal, loss, or public failure. It came through exhaustion that no vacation could fix, responsibility without rest, decisions without certainty, leadership without refuge. I was surrounded by people every day, yet internally, I carried everything alone. There is a kind of loneliness that does not come from isolation. It comes from being the one who must always be strong. For a long time, I believed I could manage that weight the same way I managed everything else, through structure, discipline, and control. But one season in my life made something painfully clear. You can manage a schedule. You can manage a team. You can manage pressure. You cannot manage your soul. It was during that season that I made a decision that did not fit my professional identity. Not a political decision, not a public one, a private one. I chose to be baptized, not as a statement, not as a signal, not for visibility, but because I finally understood that what I was missing could not be engineered. From that moment on, I made one small, quiet rule for my life. Every night, before sleep, I kneel. No cameras, no audience, no announcement. I open the Bible, and I read slowly, and I pray to Jesus Christ for 10 to 15 minutes. At first, my prayers were not impressive. I did not ask for power. I did not ask for success. I did not ask to be protected from difficulty. I simply placed my life in His hands, my work, my family, my decisions, the things I understood, and especially the things I did not. In the beginning, it felt ordinary, almost too small to matter. But something subtle began to change over time. Not my schedule, not my responsibilities, not the pressure around me, my posture inside the pressure. Many people in America think prayer is meant to change circumstances. I believed that too. What surprised me was that prayer began by changing how I stood inside my circumstances. I did not suddenly feel powerful. I felt aligned. I did not feel invincible. I felt held. And there is a difference between being strong and no longer being alone. One night, after a long and ordinary day, I knelt as usual. Nothing dramatic had happened. No crisis had reached my door. No danger was visible on the horizon. I read from the Bible slowly, without searching for signs, without asking for answers. I prayed the same way I had prayed for months. But that night carried a different kind of stillness. Not empty, attentive. When I finished, a single thought settled in my mind with unusual clarity. It was not a voice. It was not a command. It was not urgent. Just this. Change one small decision tomorrow. No explanation, no detail, no fear attached to it. I did not analyze it. I did not debate it. I went to sleep in peace, and the next morning looked completely normal. The same routine, the same preparation, the same schedule. Yet, just before leaving, I hesitated. For no rational reason, I delayed by a few minutes. Then, without planning it, I changed my route. A different street. A small adjustment in timing. Nothing that felt important. Hours later, the news reached me. There had been a violent and serious accident. It happened at the exact place and at the exact time I was supposed to be there. I stood still when I heard the details. Not in panic, in clarity. If I had left on time, if I had followed my usual path, I would have been there. No intelligence briefing warned me. No report changed my schedule. No human voice redirected my steps. Only a quiet nudge that made no sense when I received it. I did not feel special. I felt humbled, because I understood something that day. God did not stop the accident, and He did not rearrange the world for me. He simply adjusted my steps, and sometimes that is all it takes. For many people in America, faith is expected to look loud, public, visible, certain. But what saved me that morning did not look like courage. It looked like obedience to something small. Leaving a little later, turning onto a different road. That experience dismantled one of the most dangerous illusions leaders carry. The illusion of control. I realized how often we ask God to change outcomes, when He is quietly offering to change direction. I did not speak about that morning for a long time. I carried it privately, like something fragile. Because once you recognize how narrowly your life can turn, you stop using the word coincidence so casually. Leadership teaches you to believe you are responsible for everything. Faith teaches you that you are not. That moment stripped away a belief I had lived with for years. Not the belief in effort, not the belief in discipline, the belief that control equals safety. From that day forward, I became more attentive, not slower in action, slower in assumption. I began to notice how often wisdom arrives quietly, not as instruction, but as hesitation, not as certainty, but as restraint. For a culture like America's, driven by speed, productivity, and visible results, this lesson can feel uncomfortable. We are trained to move first and reflect later. But I learned that obedience does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like waiting a few minutes longer. Sometimes it looks like choosing a different conversation. Sometimes it looks like walking away from a decision that feels urgent but unsettled. Well, that morning taught me something simple and deeply unsettling. God does not compete with my plans. He corrects my path, and the correction is rarely loud enough to interrupt pride. It is quiet enough to require humility. Many of you watching have lived long enough to say, "I should not be here." You survived something that statistics cannot explain. You missed something that could have changed your life forever. Not every protection becomes a story. Sometimes it becomes silence, and silence is where gratitude learns to live. I did not become careless after that day. I became attentive. I learned that bravery is not always standing your ground. Sometimes it is trusting a quiet instinct that makes no sense on paper. Because survival is not always about strength. Sometimes it is about humility. Not long after that season, when I found myself facing a different kind of crisis. Not danger, delay. There was a project I had carried for a long time. Not because it was personal, but because it mattered. It was meant to serve people. It was meant to move something forward. It was meant to create stability where fatigue and uncertainty had already taken root. But it would not move. Funding remained uncertain. Partners stopped responding. Conversations went quiet. Every door I approached felt closed before my hand ever reached it. At first, I did what leaders are trained to do. I analyzed the structure. I reorganized teams. I applied pressure. I followed up. I escalated. Nothing changed. Weeks passed, then months, and silence became heavier than resistance. For many Americans, this kind of moment is deeply familiar. You are not failing. You are working. But progress disappears anyway. And the longer something stalls, the more you begin to question whether persistence is still courage or quietly becoming pride. Each night, I still knelt. I still opened the Bible. I still prayed to Jesus. But my prayers changed. I stopped asking for success, not because I stopped caring, but because I realized something difficult. I did not actually want the project to survive if it was not aligned. What I wanted was clarity. So I began to pray one sentence. Lord, lead me on the right path. No conditions, no timeline, no bargaining, just direction. I expected nothing to follow, but something did. A few days after that simple prayer, my phone rang. It was a name I had not seen in a very long time. Someone who had gone silent months earlier, and someone I had quietly removed from my expectations. The conversation began carefully, not with explanations, not with apologies, with solutions. not small ones, not fragile ones. Real resources, new connections, paths I had not seen, options I could not have created on my own. What surprised me most was not the help, it was the timing. Nothing had changed on my side. I had not applied pressure. I had not followed up. I had not reopened the conversation. The only thing that had changed was my posture in prayer. The project did not merely survive, it transformed. What I once feared would fade quietly came to a close with completeness, not excess, not pride, completion. And in that moment, I understood something that reshaped how I think about leadership and faith. When we pray only for outcomes, but we remain attached to control. When we pray for direction, we release it. This was not a lesson about passivity. I did not stop working. I did not stop planning. But I stopped forcing doors. For Americans who have been taught that persistence is always the highest virtue, this distinction matters deeply. There is a moment when persistence becomes resistance, a moment when pushing harder delays what surrender would allow. I learned to recognize the difference between effort and alignment. I also recognized something uncomfortable. Much of what I had labeled responsibility was actually anxiety wearing a professional uniform. Urgency had replaced wisdom. Intensity had replaced discernment. This experience taught me something I wish more leaders could learn early. God does not always reward intensity. He often rewards trust. And trust rarely feels productive. Sometimes it feels like waiting. Before prayer became a discipline in my life, I lived with constant internal pressure. It did not weaken my performance. It did not damage my reputation. But it shaped every decision I made. Worry became normal. Urgency became a habit. And fear of loss quietly influenced what I protected, what I avoided, and what I rushed. I told myself this was responsibility. I told myself that leadership required tension. I believed calm belonged to people with easier lives. When I first began kneeling each night, I expected prayer to change circumstances. I did not expect it to change me. At first, nothing felt different, but slowly, almost unnoticed, space began to appear inside my thinking. Moments that once triggered immediate reaction began to invite pause. I listened longer. I spoke less quickly. Crisis still arrived, but it no longer controlled my timing. What surprised me most was not clarity. It was the disappearance of loneliness. Leadership isolates you even when you are surrounded by people. You hear many voices, but you carry the consequences alone. After weeks of prayer, that internal isolation began to dissolve. My responsibilities did not decrease. My workload did not shrink. But the sense of being alone inside the weight disappeared. I understood something I had never understood before. When the mind rests in God's hands, life begins to reorganize quietly. Not dramatically, not visibly, just enough to become steady. I realized that many of my struggles were not created by external pressure. They were created by internal resistance, and I was fighting outcomes before understanding direction. I was guarding control instead of trusting guidance. Prayer did not remove difficulty. It removed confusion. I did not become fearless. I became anchored. There is a difference. Fearlessness ignores danger. Anchoring allows you to face it without drifting, and that internal anchoring became the foundation for everything that followed. There is a misunderstanding about prayer that I carried for many years. I believed that if God was truly present, difficulty would disappear more quickly. But prayer did not make my life smoother. It made my life clearer. The problems remained. The opposition remained. The uncertainty remained. What changed was the way I stood inside them. Before prayer became part of my life, every problem felt urgent, every delay felt dangerous, and every mistake felt final. I moved quickly, but not always wisely. After months of kneeling, something firm and quiet formed inside me. When challenges appeared, I stopped asking, "How do I escape this?" I began asking, "What is the right step inside this?" That single question changed everything. I stopped measuring success by speed. I stopped interpreting resistance as failure. I stopped confusing noise with importance. For many people in America, this shift is deeply countercultural. We are trained to solve, to fix, to push, to overcome. But prayer taught me that storms do not always require escape. Sometimes they require direction. Many people believe faith is meant to shield them from hardship. And when hardship arrives anyway, disappointment follows. My experience was different. When difficulty came, and I was no longer surprised by it, I was steady within it. The path ahead was not always visible, but I knew I was not moving without guidance. That knowledge removed panic, and panic is often more dangerous than the problem itself. Confusion exhausts a person faster than work. Uncertainty drains courage faster than failure. Prayer did not answer every question. It prevented me from asking the wrong ones. Instead of demanding to know why every difficulty existed, I learned to ask how to walk faithfully through it. That shift preserved my strength. One of the hardest truths for a disciplined mind to accept is this: God rarely works the way we expect. We look for unmistakable signs. We wait for clarity that removes all doubt. We hope for answers that arrive complete and fully formed. But that is not how guidance usually enters a life. After months of prayer, I began to notice a pattern that was easy to overlook. Nothing changed all at once. There was no single moment when everything became clear. Instead, direction arrived in fragments. A short delay that felt unnecessary. A conversation that happened when it almost did not. A decision postponed without a logical explanation. At first, I dismissed these moments as coincidence, but as they accumulated, their precision became impossible to ignore. I realized that God was not reshaping my life in dramatic movements. He was reshaping my attention. For a culture like America's, fast, efficient, and constantly connected, attention is one of the most neglected forms of wisdom. Prayer taught me to notice what I once rushed past. I had believed leadership required constant motion. That hesitation was weakness. That stillness meant losing ground. But God often places direction inside restraint, inside pauses that feel inconvenient, inside interruptions that feel inefficient. There were days when a delayed meeting prevented an argument. Days when a postponed decision avoided a mistake. Days when a brief silence allowed clarity to emerge. None of these moments looked like miracles, yet each one quietly changed an outcome. I began to understand something unsettling and hopeful at the same time. A life can change direction without announcing itself. A word not spoken. A message left unanswered. A step not taken. God did not demand my attention. He waited for it. For a long time, I believed miracles had to announce themselves. I expected them to arrive with witnesses, evidence, and outcomes so large that no one could question them. But prayer slowly dismantled that expectation. I began to understand that many miracles pass quietly through a life, not because they are small, but because they are personal. A miracle is not always surviving something dramatic. Sometimes it is avoiding what you never knew was coming. I began to notice how often danger no longer reached me, not through force, through absence, meetings canceled at the right moment, journeys delayed just enough, decisions that felt uncertain at the time but proved right later. None of these moments created stories others would easily believe, but together they formed a pattern of protection. And that pattern changed how I defined blessing. I stopped measuring it by visible success, and I stopped counting it by applause. Instead, I learned to recognize it in quieter ways. Peace preserved, damage avoided, clarity protected. For many Americans, blessing is often connected to achievement, to growth, to progress that can be tracked and displayed. Prayer taught me to respect what remains unseen. I learned that God does not always show us what He saves us from. Often, He spares us the burden of knowing, and that too is mercy. Miracles do not always interrupt life. Very often, they preserve it. There is a fear many people carry, even if they never say it out loud. The fear that if they place their lives fully in God's hands, they will lose themselves. That obedience will shrink them. That faith will erase their freedom. I carried that fear once. I believed leadership required complete autonomy, and I believed that to kneel was to weaken, that surrender meant surrendering identity. Prayer corrected that misunderstanding slowly and gently. I did not lose my ability to choose. I gained the ability to choose without fear. Each night when I placed my life before Jesus, I did not feel controlled. I felt accompanied. There is a difference between giving up control and giving up responsibility. Prayer never removed responsibility. It removed isolation. I still made decisions. I still carried consequences. But I no longer carried them alone. For many Americans, independence is deeply woven into identity. We are taught to stand on our own, to solve our own problems, to protect our own future. Faith did not take that away from me. It gave me something stronger than self-reliance. It gave me direction. A freedom without guidance becomes anxiety. Authority without humility becomes burden. Prayer did not make my will weaker. It anchored it. And an anchored will can endure far more than a restless one. I want to speak honestly for a moment. I do not believe that every prayer is answered in the way we hope. I do not believe that faith guarantees outcomes. I do not believe that kneeling before God removes sorrow from the world. I have prayed prayers that were not fulfilled in the form I imagined. I have waited longer than I wanted. I have accepted answers that first felt like silence. But through all of it, one truth has remained steady. No sincere prayer offered to Jesus Christ is ever ignored. Sometimes the answer arrives as protection. Sometimes it arrives as delay. Sometimes it arrives as strength instead of change. And I learned that God's faithfulness is not measured by how closely events match my expectations. It is measured by His presence within them. There were nights when I knelt with more questions than words. Nights when all I could offer was honesty. Those prayers did not feel powerful. They felt human. But prayer is not about performance. It is about relationship. God does not respond to polished language. He responds to sincerity. For an American culture that often values presentation, confidence, and results, this truth can feel unsettling. But faith matures when we stop trying to pray correctly and start praying truthfully. That honesty became my refuge. I want to speak directly to those who have lived long enough to carry both wisdom and weariness, to those who have raised children and now watch them raise their own, or to those who have buried people they loved, to those who have rebuilt life after illness, loss, disappointment, or quiet failure that never made the news. You understand something that cannot be taught in classrooms. Faith matures beyond expectations. Trust grows not from certainty, but from endurance. Prayer did not make me certain about outcomes. It made me certain about companionship. I learned that I was not forgotten, and neither are you. Many of you have prayed prayers no one ever heard. You have stayed faithful when nothing improved quickly. You have remained kind when bitterness would have been easier. You have continued to show up when recognition never came. Your faith matters. Your quiet obedience matters. Your endurance matters. In a culture that often celebrates visibility, platform, and influence, I want to say something clearly. God has never measured significance the way society does. Some of the most powerful acts of faith leave no public record. They happen in kitchens, in hospital rooms, in empty houses, in ordinary mornings when grief still lingers but responsibility still calls. And God sees all of it. I want to lift my eyes beyond my own life for a moment. The world is moving faster than ever, but it is not becoming more peaceful. Technology advances. Information multiplies. Voices grow louder, yet hearts grow more distant. Fear divides neighbors who share the same streets. Pride separates people who share the same faith. Anger blinds those who once desired justice. I have seen how quickly distrust spreads, how easily pain turns into identity, how often disagreement turns into dehumanization. And yet, I still believe something deeply. I believe goodness has not disappeared. I believe repentance is still possible. I believe hearts can still turn back toward what is right. I do not ask the world to follow me. I ask it to remember humility. I do not ask leaders to claim holiness. I ask them to remember accountability. I do not ask people to abandon reason. I ask them to rediscover conscience. Faith, when lived quietly, does not divide. It grounds. When prayer becomes discipline instead of display, it heals. When belief becomes action instead of argument, it restores. This is my prayer, not for dominance, not for recognition, but for dignity, not for victory over one another, but for patience with one another, not for louder voices, but for wiser hearts. Before I finish, I want to leave you with one truth that now governs my life. No one is too important to kneel. No one is too burdened to pray. No one is too far away to return. Turning away from what slowly harms us is not weakness, it is courage. Choosing the path of righteousness is not naive, it is necessary. If these words resonate with you, do not rush past them. Sit with them. Let them challenge the pace of your life, not just the thoughts in your mind. And if you feel moved, share your own story, not to impress anyone, not to build an audience, but because your quiet experience may strengthen someone you will never meet. Stay connected. Stay honest. Stay open to guidance that does not announce itself. And I will end where I now begin every day, not with certainty about outcomes, but with confidence about presence. I am not alone, and neither are you. May peace find your home. May clarity guide your steps. And may you never forget this simple truth. Even in silence, you are not abandoned. Before you scroll away, before another headline, another notification, another argument fills your attention, give yourself one quiet moment, not to analyze what you just heard, not to agree with it, not to debate it, just to notice what stirred inside you. Because the most important conversations in your life will never happen on a screen, on a stage, or in a comment section. They happen in the silence you avoid. If you are tired of carrying everything alone, if you are strong on the outside but exhausted on the inside, if you have done everything right and still feel unsure, you do not need louder answers. You need space for a quieter one. And sometimes, the first step toward a different life is not changing your circumstances. It is simply allowing yourself to stop running from stillness. If this message gave you even one quiet moment of clarity, carry it with you today. Let it shape one conversation, one decision, one small act of kindness. That is how real change begins. Not loudly, not publicly, but faithfully. Before the music fades, take one slow breath. Just one. You do not need perfect words. You do not need a prepared prayer. If you choose, simply say, quietly, in your own way, "Lead me on the right path." And let that be enough. And when you rise from this moment, walk gently. Someone near you may need the peace you just found.